about anti-Semitism. Um, we were supposed to have two more guests that were going to join us. Unfortunately, one of them is not feeling well, and the other one just is their jet lag, and it's 4 o'clock in the morning. So she was supposed to send us a video, something relating to anti-Semitism. Lauren Isaacs is her name for those, and Agnes Imani, who is sick. So please get well soon. But you're going to be amazing today, and I'm going to say I know them really well.
Yeah.
So I know, and I do not know you very well.
Okay.
And this is a great opportunity for us to really get to know each other.
Wonderful.
On one of my favorite topics. But it's a favorite topic, but I can't stand talking about it.
Yeah.
It's sort of
It's
like,
an important topic.
Right. It's so 1930s,
Yeah.
right? You know, it's like something needed to change
Yeah.
since. So talking about anti-Semitism, let's first introduce you. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do on your regular day,
Yeah.
and also how you got involved in being somewhat of a representative for the Jewish community.
Well, thank you, first of all, for saying that I'm a representative for the Jewish community. I mean, I think that's really important.
Definitely.
Nothing I ever asked to do, I was kind of forced into it or pushed into it. And I have to say it's probably one of my greatest, one of the greatest things that I do on a daily basis, having never made the decision to actually do it on my own.
Well, in reality, none of us really do. I mean,
No.
this is not a career. I mean, for some it is. It's just
Right.
a job, but it's something that we almost have to do as ambassadors by being Jewish.
I agree with you. So, like you say, my name is Shai DeLuca. I live here in Canada now in Toronto. I'm both Israeli and Canadian. I grew up between Israel and Canada, so I spent many years here growing up. I spent years in Israel, and today people most well know me for my TV. I do TV, City TV on Cityline specifically. I'm an interior designer by profession. Nothing to do with anti-Semitism,
Right.
or working within the Jewish community specifically. I started working in television in 2010. And for me, it was kind of this jumping off point of really kind of moving away from, or not away from, but adding, in addition to interior design, this kind of other aspect of design and bringing it to a bigger audience. And I only go to say that because in 2014, when the war happened back home in Gaza, it was the first time that I was a public personality when something was happening in Israel,
Right.
openly about it.
Right.
And it was then that I started to really understand what that means and what it means to be a public or have a public persona, and be Jewish and be Israeli and be somebody who supports our state,
Right.
who's somebody who fights anti-Semitism. And I became the target of a lot of violence, a lot of violent threats, death threats, threats to shoot me at my studio, threats to blow up my car, threats to, if I go through all of them, I'm sure I'd make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. Horrible, horrible, horrible things. And it was at that point that I really understood that I have this public platform. I have this kind of this audience, which I wouldn't normally have. And it was a responsibility for me to really use this platform for not only the fun and, kind of the lighthearted things that I talk about, whether it was design, fashion, whatever those things are, but it made me understand that I had a responsibility to my community and to our people to use that platform to fight anti-Semitism as well.
So first off, I'm going to applaud you for your bravery. And the reason for that is most people that are on this side, meaning like because the way the media plays it there's always looking for a victim, right? And the Jewish person is no longer the victim, right? It started with the Arab-Israeli conflict, right? And somewhat it stemmed into the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, right? And then you're going to take the Palestinian and say, well, he's the victim and the Israeli is the aggressor. But you being a public figure, how's that been for you? Because you mentioned that there were threats, but in terms of your livelihood, did it affect you in any way, shape, or form?
That's a hard question to answer because I don't know how many jobs I might have lost or potential clients I might have lost in terms of my design aspect of my work, because they never came to me first and said, now we're leaving you because of it. But
Gotcha.
I don't know. That said, I have been extremely lucky in terms of my media career. I have been extremely lucky to work with people who support me, who have been supportive, who have always stood behind me and by me when I've asked them to. So I've been very lucky. However, I do know that the majority are not my story. The majority do fear losing jobs. The majority do fear, some sort of backlash or reprisal from people. And I think that that's a sad reality that we live in.
It's very very sad. I mean, I'm a teacher,
Yeah.
so like again, I don't do this Israel talking
Yeah.
stuff on a regular basis. It's something that I just love to do.
Right.
But it's very interesting because I mean, I teach at a Jewish school.
Okay.
So teaching at a Jewish school, you can't even talk about politics.
Right.
You can't even talk about the positions, and it troubles me for this particular reason. We're not going against anyone.
Yeah.
At no point in time do I say death to the Arabs. At no point in time do I say death to the Palestinian people.
Right.
That's not the position that we're taking. We're there to say empowering both sides, talking about peace, bring people together. Like here we're talking about anti-Semitism. We're not talking about anti-Israel.
Right.
But somehow Israel is in the forefront. And you were saying that you're an Israeli, right?
Yeah.
You kind of started stating
Yes.
it, so meaning you have more of a connection. How do you feel about Jewish people who are not from Israel and they fear defending the state because they're not from there?
I learned a very interesting term when I started to do this kind of speaking against anti-Semitism or for Israel, which I didn't really know beforehand. In 2015 or 16, began working with Camera on Campus, which is an organization that
I
stands
know
for
Camera from Boston.
Yep, from Boston. Yep. So the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting in America, and I started, traveling the world and really speaking speaking to different university groups, speaking to different student groups. And I learned a term. Although blonde eye or blue eyes, blonde or fairly fair, I'm a Sephardi Jew. I learned a term called shtetl mentality, which I didn't know what that was at the beginning. I thought, well, that's very interesting. What is it? And it's really the mentality that so many, because North American Jews are predominantly Ashkenazi Jews,
Yep.
there is this intergenerational trauma that so many have when it comes to speaking out against things that are happening to the Jewish people. The shtetl mentality basically says, Jews in these small shtetls when they lived in Eastern Europe, when pogroms were happening or anti-Semitism was happening, the idea was keep your head down, try to, it'll pass. We say in Hebrew, Gamze Yavo,
Yeah.
this too shall
This too shall
pass.
pass, yep.
And it's one of those things that it really saddened me because I see it still happening today.
Right.
People are so scared to speak up. People are so scared to really speak out against because there is this fear, this intergenerational fear of reprisal, of losing a job, of being targeted in whatever way. And unfortunately, fortunately for me, I have a great backing. But unfortunate for a lot of other people who don't have that backing, they feel like they don't have that support. And as much as it frustrates me sometimes when I see it come from within our own community, I have to take a step back and say, I understand why. But I think it's something that we need to work on. I don't think I know it's something that we need to work on.
How are we able to bring the community together? Because I feel that the biggest problem that we have is that we're not united.
Right.
And what's sad about this, it's not that we're not united as a community when there's like a nice, Jewish event like
Right.
Rosh Hashanah, but like when it comes to this, and the rise of anti-Semitism. In the last, I'm going to bring a little fact, like in the last 13 years, anti-Semitism has been in the forefront in terms of violence
Right.
against Jews
Right.
all over North America. The numbers are the highest when it comes to Jews. And, other people will say, well, no, maybe it could be blacks or Hispanics or whoever else is the victim of the moment.
Sure.
But the reality is it's the Jews. And we don't want to sit here and cry you a river, but we want to say, why is this happening and why are we not stopping it? And also at the same time, why are we not talking about the differences between Israel and Jewish people,
Right.
which there is a difference. Israel is the homeland of the Jews. There's no question.
Yep.
But there is a little bit of a separation between, being Jewish and Israel. And yet for some reason, they're always interconnected.
I do notice that. I don't know if it's so much here in Canada. I do know, like I said, I have had the amazing opportunity to speak across the globe when it's come to kind of anti-Semitism and fighting anti-Semitism. And what I notice is that there is a small, but it's very loud, fringe part of the Jewish community, predominantly in the U.S., but here as well, that is so it's so entrenched in the fact that they want to be American or they want to be Canadian or they want to be seen as wherever it is that they live.
Right.
And there should be no, an American should not feel any less American because they're Israeli,
Right.
or Canadians should not feel any less Canadian because they're Israeli or Jewish.
Right.
So these things should not, fight one another. And yet, within the Jewish community, we see this kind of need. And again, it goes back to that intergenerational trauma of saying, hold on. We are Canadian first and foremost. Jewish comes second, just because we want to be seen as equal in the eyes of everybody. And
But was it not the same way in Berlin? I mean, they were
100%.
they were saying in the 30s, right, that Berlin was the new Jerusalem.
100%.
So we have a I don't know, like a blueprint of everything that happened already, and yet we still think that we can change it somehow.
Well, what do we say? If you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it, right? So
And that's why we're in this position.
Well, people get mad at me when I say that I look at the anti-Semitism that's happening now in North America, and I say, to me, it resembles anti-Semitism in the early 30s in Europe. I'm not saying the 40s. We don't have, God forbid, gas chambers or whatever. We don't have that. But that sentiment, that idea, that hatred, that fear is the same words, the same tone, the same scapegoating. It's happening now. And, people have to be a little bit more willing to accept it and be honest about it, because otherwise it's not going to change.
You mentioned organizations and you mentioned the shtetl mentality. I didn't really want to get into it, but I will. Okay. There is an organization. Well, I used to work for Stand With Us. So I used to be the West Coast coordinator for Stand With Us. So that's why I know Camera and all these organizations.
Michael's a wonderful guy.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the one thing I could tell you is that there's an organization called J Street. And which kind of goes, in my opinion, and again, this is my own personal opinion, somebody thinks otherwise, goes against everything that we stand for in some ways, which is defending our people for our rights, defending our rights to be who we want to be. And yet, when you're dealing with the Middle East conflict, believe you me, you can solve it very, very easily. If you really want to know, I can give you some pointers. But because we're in this situation right now, where we are always looking for the storyline of the victim versus the aggressor. This organization kind of came in and said, let's kind of talk about peace. But the people that they bring in are usually anti-Israel people. The people that they're bringing in is all the people who don't believe that the Jewish people should even have a state. And if they do, it's like, I believe Jewish people should not die. Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate it, right?
Yes.
I'm sure some police officers who were involved in whatever happened also said, well, I didn't really want him to die. Right? But they're still involved. So I want to ask you, what do you feel when you hear or see an organization like J Street, and how bad or how good are they for our community?
I look at J Street again. I look at J Street. I learned about J Street first in the U.S., and then I know there is a J Street Canada as well. I know that J Street in the U.S. started off to be a little bit more subdued in terms of their anti-Israel rhetoric, and lately, especially during the last presidency, it became a lot more overt. I think that it's very interesting that J Street is predominantly an American organization. Yes, Jewish, but American organization. Very much adamant talking about what the future state of Israel should look like in terms of borders, in terms of security. And
But who are they? I mean,
that's what's it. So unless you live in Israel and unless you are Israeli, unless you live that reality, unless you are sending your children to the army, unless you are doing those things, with all due respect to every Jew around the world, you do not get a say on what happens in Israel. You just don't. The same way that Americans don't get to say what happens in Canada, Canadians don't get to say what happens in America, you do not get to say what happens in Israel if you're not a citizen. You want to? By all means, make aliyah, start to vote, pay your taxes, do all the things that we do, and bring about the change that you're trying to bring about. But I think that these organizations, while may have good intentions or had good intentions, I think that with everything that's happening now, especially with it being so en vogue to be anti-Semitic, I think that it's just been a lot easier for them to kind of move into, and I'm not going to call them anti-Semitic, but move into sometimes territory that can be seen as anti-Semitic.
Well, since you mentioned the States, so the States has APAC. Right, so I think here it's something else. I
think it's CPAC.
CPAC here. I don't know what they're doing here, but but it's different. But
I'm horrible with Canadian politics.
But there's so many. There's so many. But again, they're all very much doing the same thing, just trying to raise money. That's my opinion.
You're right.
On it.
You're right.
But we have APAC. But J Street sort of became this like anti-APAC. And it just drives me insane to think that, like, we need an organization that's anti-something that's promoting Israel in the U.S. Like, why do we need that side? Now, I'm all about having these conversations. But there's literally an organization out there that's there in order to hurt another organization and in another way to hurt their own citizens, their own people who... Because I'm sure that there are many Jews who are kind of like, look, I support Israel, but I kind of also support peace. But why does there need to be why does there need to be an organization like J Street? Why do you believe that there's a need for it in some ways?
For J Street?
For J Street to exist.
I think that there's a need for any person who feels like they need to have a voice. There should be an organization or at least a group that he's able to, or he or she is able to, voice their opinion. I think the problem is when you look at AIPAC specifically, I mean, Lord knows, social media is a wonderful tool, and as much as it's wonderful, it's one of those things that I hate. It's one of those love-hate things, because as wonderful as it is, it really has become a breeding ground for so much racism and anti-Semitism and all kinds of different hatred, and it really goes unchecked. And when I look at an organization like AIPAC, and I see the comments that so many these AIPAC posts get, you should be a foreign. This should be a foreign. There are laws in the U.S. that have to be. You have to register as a foreign entity. This should register as a foreign entity. And when I say to people, AIPAC are American citizens who happen to be Jewish, but they're American citizens. Why is that a foreign entity? Well, because they support Israel. So it always comes back somehow. It always comes back to Israel.
Right.
And you started off by saying, we can, or we should be able to kind of differentiate between Israel and the Jews. And yes, but no, because, at the end of the day, all this anti-Semitism, which kind of has masked itself as, oh, we're not anti-Semites, we're anti-Zionists. At the end of the day, if you pick through it, you're being anti-Semitic, and anti-Zionist is just kind of like a pretty bow to put on it, so that you seem less hateful.
Well, that's the thing. I wanted to know, what do you think what is really your opinion when it comes to anti-Zionism versus anti-Judaism?
Yeah.
What do you think is the big difference, or maybe it's just what is it? A sheep in wolf's clothing.
I mean, I think that if we understand the definition of Zionism to be what the definition of Zionism is, which is the right of the Jewish people to self-determination in our indigenous homeland, nothing more, nothing less.
Yep.
It doesn't talk about Palestinians. It doesn't talk about Arabs. It doesn't talk anything else. What we as a Jewish community have allowed, and this is one of the things, again, one of the big issues that I have with our own community, is we have allowed other people who are not Jews to redefine what our liberation is. And that's a problem. Today we look at the Black community, at the Indian community, at the indigenous community. When I say Indian, I mean India, from India, the Asian community. All these different communities have faced racism and have faced backlash and each and every time people stood up and say, you don't get to decide for them what is racist, you don't get to decide what is anti-Asian, but for Jews, it seems to be that everybody has an opinion and everybody should get to weigh in. You don't.
There goes the shtetl mentality of allowing it to happen.
You don't. And that's exactly
the
right.
language, and I'm going to say certain things, like how many people refer to the West Bank, right?
Yeah.
I mean, West Bank, do you even know that the West Bank is located on the east side of Israel?
Right.
That it's the West Bank of Jordan. Jordan is a new country created by the same people that created Israel. Like there's so much.
Pakistan too.
Right. So, but for some reason, we're falling to the language of our enemies, and we're allowing it to happen. And again, if a lie is told 1,000 times, it's still a lie, but people start to believe it, right? Once you start to spread something.
100%.
There are people who would say that we use the Holocaust as an excuse, and I can't stand when people say that, because I usually never refer to the Holocaust when I talk about things, but I go, that's the last place I want to go to, and God forbid this happens again. But we have to take a look at how did we get there, right? Because people are just looking at the Holocaust as one thing, as opposed to no, there are pogroms that happened in the 30s and why people left, and we're noticing right now that the Jewish community of France there's rarely a Jewish community there, Argentina and Russia, many places around the world that people are leaving, and we ask why are they leaving? Because the economy? No. The difference between why Israelis leave, it has nothing to do with this, the hatred of Israel. Right. It's the hatred of maybe the finances, right? Or maybe
the bureaucracy.
Right, but again, it's more about sort of taxes are too high, as opposed to leaving because you hate the country. Right. Whereas many people, even Arab people who leave their Arab countries, they don't leave because of the economy, right? Maybe some do, but mostly it's because of danger or bad situations. So my question to you when it comes to this is, why do you feel that Israelis, that Jewish people and Israelis have such a different perspective when it comes to anti-Semitism? Why do you feel like they see it from two different eye sets?
That's a great question. I actually just answered that probably a couple of weeks ago in an article that I was being interviewed for, and I said that You know, because like I said at the beginning, I grew up some years here in my childhood, and then of course in Israel. And then when I came back here the last time, and it was after my longest period of being in Israel, which is about 14 years, and I came back and I started to notice the fact that, like you say, you know, there's this kind of this different mentality, or the different ways in which people look at anti-Semitism, and what was so obvious to me, but I guess, you know, it was something that I needed to verbalize for other people to realize, is that in Israel, we are a majority. The Jews, we are a majority. It is the only place in the world that we are a majority. And when you are Israeli and you fight anti-Semitism, it's a different type of anti-Semitism. It is a collective, fighting against terror specifically. And I think that that's what a lot of people don't understand. Outside in the diaspora, when we're fighting anti-Semitism, yes, of course, there is that issue of terror, but it is not the same what Israelis face. Israelis are very adamant about it is an existential fight. So we are fighting to exist. Here in the diaspora, people will tell you, you live in a great country. It's Canada. It's free. It's this. It's there. Wonderful. All of those are great. It's not existential in the way that they look at it. I don't look at it any differently. Fighting anti-Semitism in Canada is existential just as much as it's existential in Israel. It might not be right today, right now, but it is the same idea. The same idea in the 30s. In 1933, nobody would have thought that, the existential threat of anti-Semitism would have ended in what it ended in the 40s. Right. So, while Israelis are a little bit, what's the word I want to? They're a little bit rougher, a little bit a little bit rougher, much like the prickly pear. So a little bit rougher on the outside. The reason is because we have this existential threat that from the beginning of the modern state until today we fight on the daily. Jews in the diaspora have a little bit easier life when it comes to the way in which they need to interact with anti-Semitism, because it is not overt, everyday, all day, existential, countries around you trying to kill you. Here, it's someone said something anti-Semitic to me. There was whatever. It's not as pressing. And I think that that's one of the things that I try to instill here in all Jews who live outside of Israel, is that it does not need to be someone holding a gun to your head for it to be existential. It is the fact that people are trying to erase your history, erase your heritage, erase your identity. That's happening every day, all day here. And if you don't fight it, it's going to end up to, I hope not, but it is exactly leading to where it led the last time. Listen, I don't think it's going to happen exactly the same here in North America, but it's going to get bad again.
Well, you mentioned something very interesting. You mentioned about the Israelis and the Jews, and you mentioned that, well, in Israel, they're facing, terrorism on a regular basis, so they may be more united against it, and it's less about anti-Semitism. Correct. However, there are many people in Israel who also have a problem with the state. Yes. Who also are sort of, in my opinion, self-hating Jews. Okay. And there's quite a bit of them, and they're pretty loud. So what would you say to those types of people who are kind of like, look, again, as I go back to the blueprint, you saw what happens if you don't support. Now, you don't need to be an advocate for everything and anything, and it's okay to stand up when you see that something, somebody's doing something wrong. Right. But there's a little bit of a difference between calling Israel an apartheid state, right, using rhetoric from South Africa, and calling Israelis rapists and that they hurt babies and children. What would you tell the Israelis that are there, living there, paying taxes and are a part of it, who see the terrorism and yet still support the anti-Israel people? Right.
So I will say that the overwhelming majority of the Israelis that you're speaking about tend not to have been Israelis who, I won't say have a connection to the country, but what we are seeing a lot is there has been a very big number of people who are making aliyah, which is great. Absolutely.
Making aliyah for the audience is people who are moving to Israel.
Moving to Israel, excuse me. Yes, moving to Israel. And that is great. Aliyah specifically talks about Jews going back to Israel. And I think that that's wonderful. We are seeing, however, there are I won't say a large number. I don't know if I agree that it's a large number of Jews who are anti-Israel per se. I will tell you this. You put two Israelis in a room, you'll have five different ideas about anything that the government does. The one thing that I get from people all the time is like, you don't want to say anything against your government. Oh my God, I am the most vocal when it comes to things that happen in Israel that by the government, from any government. It doesn't happen.
Well, I meant, let's just say I say stuff about Trudeau, but I still love Canada. Well, but there's a difference between the two, because once you kind of start talking negatively about the government as a whole and the system, you're sort of turning away and bring people in to say, okay, come on, let's talk about Israel as a terrorist state, as a Nazi state.
As a state, you cannot. I mean, if we generalize and we said, for example, I'm going to now, and I use this example all the time, especially with after the Asian hate that happened over the summer. If I took China and said everything that China is doing is the responsibility and the absolute issue of every single Chinese national around the world, that would be racist.
Absolutely.
And of course it would be racist. So why is it then are we so comfortable to say Jews somehow, because the government did this A, B, C, or D, you now no longer have the right to a state. Right. You now no longer have the right to sell. Well, what does that mean? I mean, ridiculous.
So I actually have an answer for that, and so we can take it further. Well, they will say, well, at least those Chinese people are not supporting what China's doing. And yet the Israelis that live here and the Jewish people support what Israel is doing to the poor Palestinians, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really the way the conversation is twisted.
Sure.
Right? Because you're not going to have many Chinese people saying, oh, what happened in Wuhan and it's great, or how they treat their people.
100%. But I also don't see a lot of Israelis or a lot of, Jews saying, every single bad thing that ever. Listen, the reality on the ground is, and we have to understand, is as much as, and it's my own fault because I make that comparison. It is a comparison, but a general comparison. It's never going to be the same. I mean, we are talking about a country the size of Rhode Island that is surrounded by terrorists, looking to annihilate the country is not exactly the same as a country the size of China that is on one side water, on the other side, China doesn't need to worry. It's not existential. Right. And I think
Plus they're not being threatened by, almost anyone except for North Korea.
Literally every single person around them. So, it's different. I use an example just because I want people to understand that you cannot blame an entire people because of something that a government does. However, on the flip side, it's also a different situation. The reality on the ground is just a different one.
When we're talking about, we're going to stay on the Israel issue. And it's very interesting to me because when I used to go to a lot of rallies, I filmed a movie years ago called Protest, where I followed 35 different protests around the world and kind of saw the anti-Israel rhetoric that was going around. And what I did notice was that the people that are supporting Israel, they go, we love Israel, Am Yisrael Chai. You would never hear anything anti-Palestinian. Right. What I mean by that, of course you're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, few people saying it, but it's not going to be pictures of, dead babies or you're killing. Not only that, it's not going to be anti-Palestinian, it's going to be anti-Hamas. It's going to be anti-Hezbollah, anti-Islamic Jihad, anti-whatever terrorist organizations there. So how can we fight something that we're fighting in a way a people, but we're not really fighting a people. We're fighting certain ideologies. Because if you look at the Hamas charter, it calls for the destruction of Israel. Right. So anybody that supports Hamas is supporting the destruction of Israel.
Listen, it doesn't only call for the destruction of Israel. I mean, not too long ago, Ismail Haniyeh was standing in Gaza and he was saying, go find a knife wherever you are and rip out the hearts of Jews around the world.
Yes, exactly.
He wasn't only talking about Israel. But here's the thing that, it's this is kind of the absurdity of anti-Semitism is that it is so entrenched in hate that right now you see people who claim to be progressive in politics say, well, Hamas is a liberation organization. Right. But, they're just trying to liberate the
that's the PLO. That's the Palestinian Liberation Organization.
That is the technical, PLO. Right. But it's people who now will say, well, Hamas is just your freedom fighter is they say
IDF,
exactly. Mm-hmm. So your freedom fighter is this, is my terrorist. Your terrorist is my freedom fighter. And it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. The bending over backwards that racists and anti-Semites will go to excuse or even accept murder or threatening Jews is mind-boggling to me. I mean, and it always 99% of the times it is the whitest non-ethnic person who will sit in front of me and say to me, Hamas is a freedom fighter for Palestinians, like the IDF is a freedom fighter for you. And I look at them and I say, "Are you absolutely out of your mind?" Right? I mean, they're not even the PLO, which is the PA, which is the elected official now, although 16 years since their last
real election.
They are the representatives of the Palestinian. They do not agree with. So what are you coming to me now? You who have absolutely zero connection. You're not Jewish. You're certainly not Palestinian. You're not Arab. You're none of these things. But you're going to come here, and it's almost this. I find now it's this, it's a term that hasn't been used in years, but I use it now. It's called white saviorism. It's this idea that this kind of this non-ethnic, it's almost like they feel badly, so badly about certain things that happen in the world, they try to throw it on somebody else. So I feel badly about what my country did in the Middle East. Let me turn it around now and turn it into like an Israeli issue or a Jewish issue. And it never ceases to amaze me that it is from these people who claim to be champions of human rights, champions of civil rights, champions of equality, champions of no racism are always the ones who are the most racist, the most anti-Semitic, and the most willing to accept murder of Jews.
So what are we doing about it? Because I've been one of those
Yeah.
people that calls people out.
Yeah.
So when I used to, teach debate, the one thing is like when someone's saying something wrong, tell them they're wrong.
Yeah.
Don't be you're wrong. Here's why. I'm going to give you the facts. Everything you said is incorrect. This is it, and I'm going to prove it to you.
Yeah.
And anybody in the audience can go and look this up.
Yeah.
Here's my phone number.
Yeah.
And so, but today most people are like, I don't even want to get into this conversation.
They won't even get into the conversation because you know what people tell me?
Right.
They'll tell me right away. They'll tell me, propaganda. Israeli propaganda.
Yeah.
Everything you're saying, I can give them a list of facts and tell them the sources. Israeli propaganda, Jewish propaganda. It's the Jews who run the internet, the Jews who run the... So, of course, that's what you're going to find. But here, let me send you this unknown article by this unknown author, some who knows sitting where. This is what you need to believe.
Right.
Really? This is where we are.
So there are some questions from the audience
Yeah.
that I received beforehand.
Okay.
So because I wanted to do the show a while back and then
Yeah.
it never happened. So what
Yeah.
I got here is, well, first off, some of them were already answered. But
Okay.
if there was no Israel,
Yeah.
would there still be anti-Semitism? Clearly, I know the answer to that. But the idea that
Yeah.
Jews,
Yeah.
because this is coming from Jewish people,
Yep.
the idea that Jewish people would
Yeah.
even ask that
Yeah.
question says something about us.
100%. I mean, look at history, guys. You don't have to be Jewish, nor do you have to be a historian, to understand that before the state of Israel, there was anti-Semitism. From the moment of expulsion all the way up to 1948, anti-Semitism is the most reported, if not the highest, number of victims in terms of racism in the world. We're talking about expulsion. We're talking about pogroms. We're talking about Spanish Inquisition. We're talking about the Farhud. We're talking about Beta Israel Jews. Where have Jews not lived that they have not faced anti-Semitic, but horrible state-sanctioned anti-Semitism everywhere?
Even the Imam of Jerusalem at
Yes.
the time, right, was trying to get Bosnian Muslims to be able to go and help Hitler kill the Jews. This is prior to 1948.
The Mufti of Jerusalem,
Right.
100%. And this is this is the difference that I think that people have the most issue with. Is I say anti-Semitism always existed. Unfortunately, anti-Semitism was always going to exist because Jews are the easiest people to scapegoat. However, the difference is pre-1948, after 1948. Now, what can I say pisses people
Yeah,
off?
yeah,
Can
yeah,
I say
yeah,
that?
yeah.
Now what pisses people off most is that Jews can defend themselves.
Right.
And they don't like it. It is, and I don't know, well, I shouldn't say they don't like it, but is an issue that people in the world is certainly not used to. They're not used to the fact for thousands of years, and certainly generations, Jews had to live under the umbrella of different nations and always had to be, according to whatever that nation's laws were.
Right.
Keep their head down, do whatever they had to do. And like I say, go through all of Jewish history. You will not find a time in Jewish history that there was not some sort of anti-Semitic uprising against the Jewish people in countries that were not our own.
And they were different citizens living within the country. For it's funny because I hear people all the time saying, "Well, I'm Canadian, I'm American." You know that not long ago, like even in Russia,
Yeah.
right? They would say Jewish person on their passport. It wouldn't say like Russian. For me to say, "My dad, you're Russian. You speak Russian. You
Yeah.
eat Russian food. Like everything
Yeah.
you do is Russian." It's like, no, I'm Jewish.
Yeah.
And people don't understand the difference. So, what would be the difference between, in your opinion, what would be the difference between a Jew?
Yeah.
As a nationalist Jew or a religious Jew,
Yeah.
because it's both religion and a nationality.
Yeah.
What, in your opinion, like someone says, "Oh, I connect more to the religious part, but I don't connect to the national part."
Okay. I think what's really important for the listeners to understand.
Oh
is
no,
that-
they're watching you. They're
Okay,
viewers.
viewers
Oh, yeah,
too.
They're
Well,
viewers.
hello.
Yes.
Um,
I know it's a little deceiving. We're
No,
just
no,
having
no,
a
no.
microphone.
I'm used to being like in a podcast like this. I think what's really important for people to understand is that Jews are what's called an ethno-religion.
Mm-hmm.
We're not the only. Hindis, Native Americans. There are other groups that are ethno religions, and that means that we are also a religion, but we are also an ethnicity. I can go do my DNA, which I've done, and I can see that I am Jewish by bloodline. My religion doesn't show up in my DNA, and
Right.
people, right? So I can also be a Jew who is atheist. I can be a Jew who's Buddhist. I can be. It's not. normal. It's not common because we are such a small group of people. 99% of Jews, ethnic Jews, are also Jewish by religion.
Right.
That's just how we've really overcome, all the attempts to really get rid of us over the. Our religion is a very big part of who we are. That doesn't mean that it is the only part of who we are. When I hear people say I'm not religious, I am absolutely okay with a Jewish person being proud in whatever aspect of their Judaism they most connect to. It could be religion, it could be the ethnicity, it could be culture, it could be whatever. But what I want people to understand is just because you only connect to that one part does not mean that that's the only part that exists. So you have to be willing to accept the other parts as well, accept that it's might not something that you accept, but our history and our ability to overcome is so entrenched in our religion and our ethnicity that it's almost it's hurtful, especially when Jews say, it's not such a big deal to have this part taken away, or it's not such a big deal if I don't. I am not a religious person by any means, by any aspects. I'm in Israel, we say chiloni, which is secular. Here, I probably, when you live outside of Israel, would become a little bit more connected to the religion just because you are far
You want to
from
keep
it.
the heritage,
You
right?
want to keep the heritage. But I think that, it's disingenuous for people to say that I'm only this and not this, or I'm only this. You are Jewish. You are Jewish. That's, first and foremost, you're a Jew. A Jew means many different things to many different people. But at the end of the day, whether or not you subscribe or adhere to all those things doesn't mean you aren't them because you don't subscribe or adhere to it.
Right. No, the great answers. What I want to know now is, by the way, this is from the audience. So there's a lot of lies from the other side, a lot of fabrications, a lot of, again, like using old words, old hurtful words to describe Jewish people and Israelis these days. Why are we as a society allowing for these lies to take front where if we try to give us, the facts, right? We try to explain it in a particular way, don't say Palestinian, frame it Hamas, kind of like you don't want to hurt them. Like we sit there, sort of like a fact checking. But on the other side, you can go to one rally and get 15 completely different opinions on the same topic.
Right.
Where does it come from? Where do we need to, what should we do as a community to stop the lies that are coming from the other side?
I don't think we can ever stop the lies that are coming from the other side. You'll never be able to stop it, but you'll be able to combat it. And I think that, in doing kind of the work that I've been doing specifically with regards to anti-Semitism, is that I've learned that racism often, whatever racism, whether it's anti-Black racism, anti-Asian racism tends to, one of the things that it tries to do is police that community in terms of vocabulary and words that they can use. So you will see, if you look back into the history of racism, anti-Black racism in the U.S., there were certain words that they would not allow the Black community to use because it would put a spotlight on the fact that this was racism. So they tried to police words indifferently. I see that today when it comes to Jews. If you are on social media, there is not, I don't know that a day goes by that I don't have somebody try to police what it is that I'm saying or the words in which we're using. And as of late, it's been indigenous and native. Now, the words indigenous and native, yes, are fairly new words in terms of the way in which we use them globally. And that's because of the United Nations. The United Nations gave a definition to what is indigenous. Now, I am a very big proponent, and when I go to universities and I speak about indigenous rights for Jews, I use that term because it is the correct term to use. And people will say, you're not native, you're not. Of course I'm not Native American, I'm not Native Canadian, but I'm Native Judean. I'm native from Israel. Everybody's native to somewhere. Right. We didn't just fall from the sky. So, so I think that it's really important to make sure that as a Jewish community, we make sure that we do not allow other people to police the way in which we describe or speak about our issues, whether it's our liberation, our history, our self-determination, none of those things. You don't get to police those words for us. We will speak. It is the job of non-Jews, the same way it is the job of let's say people who are not people of color, to listen to people of color when it comes to racism. It is the responsibility of the other people who are not Jews to listen to Jews when it comes to speaking about anti-Semitism.
Right.
I cannot listen to some, I don't know, whatever, some person who's not Jewish, who does not experience, who doesn't know that, doesn't have that history, to come and tell me that something is not anti-Semitic when I said it is.
But there's a lot of Jews who don't know the information,
Yeah.
and they're not putting the
Yeah.
effort to learn. It's almost like we are trying to run away from it. It's like embarrassing. Like you go to a rally.
Yeah.
And again, I interviewed many people,
Yeah.
so I'm giving you
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
firsthand,
Yeah.
where the Arabs know more about our history than we know about our own. Like, and they're quoting people like Noam Chomsky,
Yeah.
and they're quoting, Norman Finkelstein.
Right.
Like, they're just giving me
Sure.
facts. But they're Jewish, and
Yeah.
they're saying it, so I could say it. But they don't know anything about their own history, their own background.
Yeah.
It kind of like, they know that there was a Moses.
Right.
They know a little bit of what happened after, but once Jesus walked in the water,
Yeah.
we don't need to know anything.
You know,
How
it's-
important is that education for a community in order to make a change
It's
against anti-Semitism?
It's really, really important. You make a good point because you say, people will bring up somebody like Noam Chomsky, somebody like
Norman Finkelstein.
Finkelstein. I can't even say his name.
Yeah.
Norman Finkelstein. And there's a term for that. It's called tokenism.
Mm-hmm.
Tokenism means you are taking one or two people within a group of people, Jews here, and you are saying they said this, which agree, kind of like adheres to what I'm thinking. Therefore, they are right, and I'm going to tell you, Mr. Jew,
Yeah.
about what you are and what you are not.
Right.
You don't get to do that. You're tokenizing a fringe one or two people that and you are basically trying to paint the brush across all of Jews, saying that this is what Jews should believe, or because this one person said. I mean, it would be like me saying, it's very similar to me saying, I don't know, Saddam Hussein. Take one of the worst Arab people in the world that committed genocide and whatever, and saying, you know what, he said this, so that's what you must believe.
Right.
I believe that that's who you are.
Right.
We would never say that.
But
because
you know Saddam is something bad. Yet when people look at Noam Chomsky, they're like, well, he's a linguist and he's like a smart man, and Finkelstein, he worked at Purdue, so like these are important people. So they listen to academics. It's not just someone from the streets. Ilan Pappé lives in Israel. Right, so lives in Haifa.
Yes.
I mean, it's.
It's interesting because Norman Finkelstein, yes, he taught here, but now he's been banned for universities. He's
Yeah.
not allowed to teach it. I mean, so if you want to talk, if you want to bring up these people, then know who it is that you're talking about. But when I come back at you and I say to you, listen, you've given me this fact A, B, C, D. Here's really what the reality is. It's become far too acceptable for Jews to be put in a position where people who are not Jewish will say to them, you're wrong about Judaism because A, B, C, D. And then if the Jewish person comes back and says something, nah, it's because you're anti-Arab, it's because you're absolutely not. We are within our, and I said it at the beginning, within our own community, we have so much work to do. And it is this ideal that, Jews today are not, Jews of the 1930s or the 1940s in Europe. Jews today are not the Jews of the Spanish Inquisition. Jews today are not the Jews of the pogroms. Jews today are not Beta Israel Jews. Jews are not all these Jews that make up who we are today. That is our history. Yes, we are at a point in history, and if we understand anything about anti-Semitism, is that it comes in waves. So we're at a high now. We're fine in terms of, we're not physically, although in the summer we were physically being attacked in the U.S. and in Canada, but it wasn't as bad as it's been in past, and it's going to come in waves. But we have to understand that just because we're at a wave right now where it's not as bad as it has been in past, that in no way means that it won't get as bad again. So we have to stop being so comfortable in the fact that I'm living in Canada now, it's fine, my life is good, I go to work every day, I have a beautiful home, that means nothing if a generation down or two generations down, you don't have family anymore, or your people don't exist anymore. It means nothing.
It's going to take me in a segue. You are involved in an organization I'm also involved in some capacity. So we had Agnes, who were supposed to come on the show and talk a little bit about the grassroots.
Right.
Talk to me a little bit about the organization and why it began, the need for it. What is it that we're doing? I know that there's posters around the city to promote, like stop being anti-Semitic.
Right.
Talk to me a little bit about the need for that, because there are already so many organizations that I can list. What is that we're doing different?
So this is United Grassroots, of course, is what we're talking about. And I think that, over the summer, what we saw was, and what infuriated me was, we saw all these rallies in support of what people perceived to be something bad happening in Israel. And we can talk about the politics in Israel. That is, we could talk about that for another entire week.
Right.
But putting that aside for 1 second, what we saw was a lot of misinformation being put out as well. And because we live in a democracy, and because we live in a place where freedom of speech, reigns supreme, which we should, it gives the opportunity for people who have bad intentions, who know what they're saying is incorrect, but are trying to fuel maybe a backlash to a certain people, it gave them an opportunity to do that. And what United Grassroots really did is it gave a voice to all those people across the political spectrum, whether you sit on the left or on the right, a voice to be able to say, hold on, this isn't right anymore. And it came about really, I think, there was always talk about it, but we did that first rally, which was at Mel Lastman Square in the summer. And it was a response to the rallies that we were seeing at City Hall in Toronto, in Mississauga, I believe there was as well, and, kind of across the country. And the Canadian Jewish News did an article for the new year, and they interviewed myself as well as Agnes as to why it is this organization had to come about. And for me, the same things that I've said throughout this podcast for me, it's very important for Canadian Jews or Jews who live outside of Israel to understand that you no longer need to be that Jew who puts his head down. You no longer need to be that afraid, that person who's afraid to say something, because where in past we were so worried about whether it was expulsion from a government, different governmental laws against Jews. We now no longer need to worry about that, because God forbid, at the end of the day, and not that this has to be, kind of what every Jew does, but at the end of the day, if we ever got to that position again, we have our home to go back to.
Right.
So we don't need to fear that anymore. And I think it's not going to happen in this generation, unfortunately. I think it's too ingrained in us. But I think over time, and I'm seeing it, and I'm so grateful to see kind of the younger people who are now really kind of speaking out when it comes to like these grassroots movements, who are saying, we're being taught, we're in these schools, whether I go to public school or whether I go to a more kind of reform Jewish school, we're being taught things that, maybe don't really adhere to what we believe in. And yet there was never a place for us to be able to speak freely about it. So this is what this movement does. It says, I've said this, I said it before, I don't consider myself, I don't lean anywhere politically. I vote for policy. I vote for a person. I don't vote for a party. Mm-hmm. I think voting for parties is very...
narrow-minded.
It's narrow-minded. Mm-hmm. It's very misguided, because who knows? A party could be, I could agree with this and not agree with this. So what am I going to? So at the end of the day, I try to vote for policies, and I think that a lot of people felt as though they didn't have a voice. And I think a lot of people felt as though if I go to this group, I have to believe all of this, or if I go to this group, I have to believe all of this. What the United Grassroots Movement has done, in my opinion, has given a home to, doesn't matter who you are, what your voice is, what your belief is, you have a place to come and voice it, and you have a community to support you within it.
What are we doing in terms of education? Because I think a lot of it stems down to education.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the young people,
Yeah.
and I just don't think they know enough about it. They know, birthright,
right?
It's a trip that they go to Israel, and they visit a lot of
Yeah.
places. By the way, even that was taken advantage of.
Yeah.
A bunch of kids, who went on birthright.
It's
Said,
not now.
how come we're not going to the Palestinian territories? Well, they're not paying for the trip, and we're
Right.
showing you Israel, and this has nothing to do with it. We're trying to
Right.
stay away from politics.
Right.
But instead of in my opinion, there needs to be an aspect where they talk about the politics, where they
Right.
talk about the two sides.
Yes.
What are we doing as a community, maybe with grassroots,
Yeah.
to try and educate the next generation? Because as my job before, I would go to universities and talk. But by that time, it's a little bit too late.
Right.
And you have so much work to do, and you don't want to focus on
Right.
it. Almost like the protest gets in the way of classes. But like in high schools or even in elementary, to start talking about Israel as this place that exists and why it exists, and a little bit of the policies that happen and what the government system is like, etc. What are we doing, or what is the organization doing to try and educate the next generation about the state of Israel?
I think one of the things that I personally am doing with the organization, I'm trying to do webinars, as many as possible, with key many personalities from all aspects of kind of the politics and the kind of the conflict. We did one with Ben Freeman. I don't know if you know who Ben Freeman is.
I do.
Who's the author of Jewish Pride, which was our first one. We're going to be doing another one with Youssef Haddad, who is an Israeli Arab who roams the world speaking for Israel, really dispelling the myth of Israeli apartheid. Or,
I know him too.
I mean, amazing. We are, we just, this.
But what if they go that these people are talking like
sorry?
like this person that you just mentioned,
Yeah.
that he's like the Norman Finkelstein, like he's the.
But he's not, though, because this is the thing, is Norman Finkelstein, and I've watched that man speak, he will stand up, he will give his story, which is a very specific story. What we try to do, and what I try to do with the people that I'm trying to bring to do these webinars with, is this is a person who has a broader representation. So it is not a person who is saying, I only believe this way, and, I have my blind. It is a person who is giving the kind of the facts of, this is an organization that I belong to, so it's not just Norman Finkelstein with his Norman Finkelstein kind of mentality. It is Youssef Haddad, who is a part of an organization that is a larger, broader organization. And what he's doing is he's really bringing, not only he himself, when I speak to him, it's he himself, but what he does is he really introduces to the world the idea that there are 20%, excuse me, 1.9 million Israeli Arabs who are proud to be Israeli, who are proud to serve in the IDF, who are proud to be part of the Israeli society. And this is what we're trying to do, is really show the world a different aspect of this kind of this rhetoric that everybody is trying to push on the apartheid, but doesn't exist. These things don't exist. It is complete. As somebody who is a lover of history, I find no more offense than somebody who takes the tragedy of apartheid in South Africa and tries to apply it in Israel.
Right.
Where people are 100% equal, where, when I was in the army, my commander was Arab. That doesn't exist in apartheid. Like, if you understand what apartheid is, you're speaking ridiculousness now. So I think that what Grassroots is really trying to do is trying to broaden, it's trying to show it on a broader, kind of a broader perspective. Not really trying to focus in on just this point or just this point, because when you do that, you really don't get anywhere. You keep hitting that same point over and over and over again, but you have to expand your mind and to understand that it is not so black and white. There is nothing black and white about the conflict. There is nothing black and white about history in general. So I think that that's what Grassroots is doing a really great job doing.
There is, the LGBT community here in Toronto, and I'm a big supporter of the LGBT community, but there's something that really bothers me where, there's queers against apartheid Israel, right? And it's huge. I mean, it's not just here, but it's pretty big here. And it's almost weird for me. I put this post. It's like, chickens for KFC. Just something as ridiculous.
I say vegans for meat.
Right. And it's kind of like these people that you're supporting right now, because clearly you're going for Hamas and not just the average Palestinian, they don't believe in anything. They don't give you any rights. How is it that you are going to support that? And they're getting a lot of support from the gay community. I'm very...
I will say this. I grew up in the 90s in Israel, and I was very much a part of pushing for LGBT rights and LGBT equality in Israel. I don't know if you know Mohammed El-Kurd. No. He's very well known now. He was, I think, hired by The National. He was on CNN. He and his sister are two Palestinians or two Arabs who live in Sheikh Jarrah in Jerusalem. And he became very well known for posting kind of these ideas, these anti-Israel ideas. Now, he claims to be indigenous to Israel. Which is a little bit of a joke, because if you know anything about Arab last names, his last name is El Kurd, which is his family was from Kurdistan.
They're Kurdish. Yes.
Anyway,
and
whatever.
All of them are like that. If you take it back, we know where they're from.
Of course, you know that Al-Masri, Al-Khalabi, whatever. You know where they come from.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that that you see this kind of push. Now, he is LGBT, and he pushes for this Palestinian, and I made a response to him one time, and I said, listen, if you went over the border into Gaza, you'd be dead in a second.
Yeah.
If you went over the border into the PA, they'd drag you behind the car.
Yeah.
What are you promoting? I don't understand what you're promoting here. And of course, it went into a very dirty, whatever against me, which was fine because he had no answer for it. But years ago, I wrote an article about the myth of pinkwashing. And for those who don't know what the term pinkwashing means, it's basically this idea that Israel somehow uses its LGBT rights and LGBT kind of the way we've moved forward with LGBT rights in Israel as a smokescreen to what's happening with Palestinians. And as
Well, it's all a part of progressiveness, right? I mean,
100%.
Yeah.
And as somebody who grew up in the 90s, who served, who came out while I was in the IDF, who all these things, it's so offensive to me because I worked so hard to I marched in the first gay pride in Israel, and it was so hard for me to be able to do the things that I did, pushing forward to have the almost, we'll say 99% equality right now in Israel in terms of having all the equal rights that everybody else has. And we can go into that, and we can go into that after. But it really offends me that somebody says that I did all of that just so I could be a smokescreen to the Palestinians. That is bull. That is 100% false. We absolutely should champion all the LGBT rights and all the LGBT successes that we've done in Israel. And you can talk about the Palestinian issue, but that is separate. What progressives try to do is they try to center every topic that has to do with Israel. Could be LGBT, it could be women, could be whatever. Everything comes back to the Palestinian issue. And what progressives are having an issue with now is that worked for a while. For a while, any topic that you discussed had to go through, I used to say had to go through Ramallah, had to go through, the PA. Now, what we're noticing, especially with the UAE and all these kind of, the Abraham Accords, is it no longer needs to go through Ramallah. Is that people are starting to notice now that the Palestinian issue is, while, of course we can't say it's just one side or the other, but a lot of it comes from their own sides, shooting themselves in the foot for so many years, and we have to be willing to talk about that, and specifically the LGBT issue. I say to people, how can you talk? When I lived in Israel and I was there and I was doing the work that I was doing for LGBT communities, I can't tell you. I probably have 7 people that I could call right now, Arab, Palestinian, who fled Gaza, came to Israel as a refugee, to save their lives because their families were going to kill them for being LGBT. Some who remained in Israel, many who were so fearful of being able, their families being able to cross from the PA into Israel, they begged Israel to actually move them to a third country, which Israel did.
Right.
And so we champion this, and yet we still have people who will say, "Queers for Palestine." What are you promoting? What does that mean to you? Because if you're talking about Queers for Palestine today, the way what Palestine or the Palestinian Authority is today, you would be dead. You have no rights. You as a person, as an LGBT person, if your family decides that it's dishonoring them, they have a right to kill you. Nobody's going to do anything about it. Hamas, we don't even have to talk about it. So what is it that you're championing? Are you championing the idea of what you think a Palestinian state should be? Because that's not what you're talking about. You're saying freedom for Palestine now.
Right. Well, they're looking for victims. Again, it goes back to the victimization, right? So it's almost like, well, no, I mean, yeah, I know what the Palestinians are doing. I know, and I'm not talking about Hamas. I'm playing devil's advocate right now. I'm talking about what Israel is doing, and we're there to support them. How do we change the narrative? Because what I'm noticing right now is, we have this thing called, Ryan, this is for you. We have this thing called Hasbara, right? Hasbara. We have to explain everything, right? It's awful. And that's all we're doing is just always giving facts. It's not working, right? You can't give a fact and there's a picture of a dead baby. Like, you'll never win. What is it that we're doing wrong when we're trying to promote Israel? We're trying to actually talk about, actually, the truth is, I don't walk around thinking about talking about Israel. The only time I want to talk about Israel is when people saying negative things about it. I'm like, we're not that bad. Why you keep putting us in this category? What should we do that's not just explaining?
I will say this as an Israeli. I think that Israel has done a horrible job when it comes to social media marketing or combating what we're seeing on social media. I think that, and when I say they're doing a horrible job now, maybe not so much. It took us too long. What Israel has had, or Jews have become accustomed to up to a certain point is, and as much as I don't like to invoke the Holocaust, people always had this, when it came to talking about Jews and whatever, because the Holocaust was so prevalent and so prominent in so many people's minds, people kind of shied away from saying, I'm against it, or now with this kind of idea of, I think the younger generation feeling as though they don't need to. I mean, I was shocked. 2 years ago, there was, I think it was the Washington Post, did an article that 67% of millennials had never heard about Auschwitz.
Right.
And I read that and I was like, 67% of American millennials have never heard of Auschwitz. And that was the first time in my heart that I felt scared. Because if you don't even know what that is. And it didn't happen. We're not talking hundreds of years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
We're talking about your grandparents.
Right.
If you don't know, then what path are we on? Because if we, like I said, if we don't learn from history, we're deemed to repeat itself. So what do we need to do? I think what we need to do as a Jewish community is we need to really look not only to ourselves. I think we need to do a much better job within ourselves and kind of pushing it out. But we have amazing allies, which I think that we need to use more of. Like, I have a very good friend of mine, Jonathan Al-Khoury, who is a Lebanese LGBT Israeli person. His family were part of the, for people who don't know, Tzadal, which is Tzfat Drom Lebanon, which is the army of southern Lebanon, which worked together with the IDF. His family were part of those soldiers who fled Lebanon, Arab, came to Israel, now live in Israel. He speaks for Israel as well, but he's part of the LGBT community. So he also speaks for the LGBT community and travels the world. He used to work with a company, an organization called Reservists on Duty, who he used to go around the world and he used to say, I'm LGBT, I am Arab, I am Lebanese, I live in Israel, I'm 100% equal, and here I am speaking for Israel. So everything that you're saying here in America, or in Canada, you know, in your privileged world that you live here in Manhattan or whatever, is a lie. And I think that we would be Jews tend to be a little bit standoffish when it comes to allowing other people to kind of allyship with us. And I understand why. We have been burned in the past by this, but I think that we have to be a lot smarter with the people that we choose to work with. And I think that if we take advantage of, and I don't mean to take advantage of someone, but we take advantage of the opportunities that we have with these people to work with us to say, you know what, it's not just Jews saying, no, you're lying, no, you're lying. It's me who they're talking about saying, no, you're lying, no, you're lying. I think that that's one of the things that's really going to help us move forward.
We know that celebrities have clout. I mean, maybe not today. Today, celebrities are kind of looked at and it's really funny. It's like over the last few years, I've noticed that, like, oh, celebrities are talking. I think since COVID and all that, and it's like they shut them up. But there are so many. Speaking of Hollywood, and we control Hollywood. How come Hollywood is not supporting Israel? How come most and if they do, it's always the Republican types. You know, it's like the John Voights of the world. It's never like, I'll give you an example. There's a person, Adam Sandler, who's a big supporter of Israel, but he would not go out and talk. Why do you feel that these people who are in a place where they shouldn't even fear the public outbreak or the public outrage? Why are they not speaking for the state of Israel, or the Jewish people?
I think there's a catch-22 here because, I mean, every year, well, not since COVID, but before COVID and I'm sure after, there is a huge Hollywood event that happens for FIDF, which is the Friends of the IDF. And every year it's basically donations for the IDF through Hollywood, through kind of these high-profile Hollywood individuals. And I don't think there's been a year that they haven't. And I'm talking about like $37 million. They get donations that we're talking about millions, tens of millions of dollars. So yes, Israel has the support, but you're right, is that it's not Adam Sandler standing on a stage doing what I'm doing right now. And I understand why, because even though I am, I'm here in Canada, it's not like I have the same profile as somebody like Adam Sandler. I still get that hate, and I still see, for those people who are listening who kind of know me, I don't know if you know the whole story that happened with Foodbenders, which is
yes, of course.
Yeah, okay. So I dared to be Israeli overtly. And this woman who I had never heard of before then decided to take my picture in my profile and have me canceled, saying that I was Palestinian murderer, that I sniper Palestinian children, all these things. And I had never spoken to her, didn't even know who she was, except for the fact that I was Israeli and I dared to say something, pro-Israel or what. Right. So I understand. I say I understand, although I would never be the person to be. It's a mentality. I know growing up in America is a very privileged, can be a very privileged, way to be brought up. When you look at Israelis versus, American Jews, and you see these American Jews who oftentimes are sitting, in mommy and daddy's, home in like Great Neck or wherever in Long Island, and I'm anti-Zionist because, but that's great. You grew up in this kind of this padded, comfy, very, lifestyle, but you don't understand that for you, it's not existential, but for the majority of Jews who live in the world, by the way, who are not the, what Americans perceive to be the white Ashkenazi Jews. Most of Israel are Sephardi Mizrahi or Ethiopian. Almost 70% are non-Ashkenazi Jews. And you see this willingness of this kind of progressive, I guess, kind of woke, I use that word, woke idea of Jews are privileged nowadays. Jews don't need to have this idea of Israel. Jews don't need to have that safety. And it's always coming from the most privileged who never had the need for it. My family was saved by Israel. Most families who live in Israel were saved by Israel, whether they came from the Arab expulsion from in the 50s or in the 50s, or it could be after the Holocaust, whatever it was, Beta Israel Jews. I mean, and you see this willingness to still today to speak over these Jews who have, whether it is, overt identities like Ethiopian Jews. I see white people speaking over Ethiopian Jews saying, no, what do you mean? You don't face racism. You're a Jew. You're fine. It's shocking.
Mind-boggling,
to me.
right?
It's shocking to me.
But when I'm talking about Hollywood specific, and I want to stay there, and the reason I want to stay there is because I feel like they have a responsibility, in my opinion, and I'll tell you why. Because we're not asking these celebrities to, again, become anti-Palestinian. Don't talk about the other side at all. Support your side. That's like, the BLM movement right now, which I'm not a fan of the BLM movement itself, meaning the hashtag BLM. I'm a big supporter of the black movements, clearly, but not what they're standing for. But I don't have to talk about BLM. I can talk about support for black people. Why can't, and if let's just say Ice Cube or whoever it is will speak, no one's going to go, why is he talking about that? Because he's a part of it.
Right.
But yet you have all these Jewish celebrities, and unless they are some sort of Republican or someone who's blackballed or ousted from the Hollywood lifestyle, they would never speak on behalf of Israel.
No.
And not only that, I remember, just as an example, and I'm a huge fan of Steven Spielberg, probably one of my favorite directors of all time, but I remember going to see Munich, and there's making it into a Hollywood story, as opposed to, really what's going on here. You're dealing with terrorists who try to kill innocent athletes. It had nothing to do with, like we're both facing these problems and let's come up with. We're always when it's about Jewish people, we're always saying let's bring peace, right? But we never stand up for our own. Why do you feel that Hollywood is not coming out and saying enough is enough? We need to start talking about this as a big issue, and we need to start supporting Israel.
Because it's a comfort thing. I think that, those who live in Hollywood and those who have those big $1 million, salaries for every movie that they do, they're used to that. And they know that, you look at it on the flip side, and I think the best way to look at it is on the flip side. I look at somebody like Gigi Hadid, who, for those who don't know, she's, a model. Her father, Mohammed Hadid, is, he was born in Nazareth, which, by the way, is not the Palestinian Authority. But anyway, he claims to be Palestinian. Gigi Hadid, who is worth, I don't even know how many millions of dollars, is considered to be a Palestinian refugee by UNRWA. So, today, I don't know if she does, but, if she decided to call UNRWA and say, I want my money or whatever it is that I'm supposed to get, she could be, this is the absurdity of it. So when I see that somebody like her who is in Hollywood, who is pushing the other side, is getting so much support, you have to understand it's almost like a pendulum. So if the pendulum is swinging so far this way, when it swings back the other way, it's going to swing back just as strong, but in the flip. So you see Jews who are, you see them getting literally, attacked verbally, attacked sometimes physically, but attacked in terms of look at Jake Tapper. Jake Tapper is the best one, kind of. I love Jake Tapper. I think he's I don't agree with everything he says.
The CNN Jake Tapper, right?
CNN Jake Tapper, who is Jewish, and he speaks out, I think, probably the most out of any kind of, I won't call him Hollywood, but the most out of kind of like a well-known personality against people like Linda Sarsour, who speaks out against, Israel, against Rashida Tlaib, against these people in America who are trying to make anti-Semitism en vogue. And I see the backlash he gets. Now, he's very lucky, much like I am, because he has the support from the people that he works with. But I see that he knows he's not going to move out of what it is that he's doing. That's what he's doing. And I think that with a lot of people from Hollywood, especially because you don't know where your next movie is going to be, they're afraid. Very much like a person who, is just doing his regular job is afraid of losing a job. They are so comfortable and privileged in the life that they live. They're like, I'll support it, but I'm not going to support it overtly. I can do it, but I cannot do it overtly. And I think that I can't blame them for that because I don't live their life. And I try not to blame somebody without kind of like walking in their shoes. But for me, who's sitting aside, for you who's sitting aside, for the viewers who are sitting outside saying, listen, this guy lives in like a multi-million-dollar mansion or whatever, say something.
Right.
Why don't you say something?
Right. But that's the thing. They do say something. They do say something. No,
By
not
saying
on
something.
this. Not on this topic. Not on this topic. Whenever it's, I'll give you an example. When the BLM things happened, right? But I don't want the audience thinking that I'm anti. But
Sure.
again, this was just something not long ago. But they did a whole campaign where white people were apologizing. Like, oh, when I said this, it's like you came out right away and started saying you have nothing to do with what the officer did. It has nothing to do with you. Why? And right away we jumped on board.
Well, let me say this. I will say this, and I say this, and I stand behind what I'm about to say. Anti-Semitism is the last form of racism that is globally accepted. It's globally accepted. It is what it is. I mean, this is just a reality that we have to understand. And it is not a reality from today. It is not a reality from, 20 years ago. It is a reality since the beginning of Jews. Anti-Semitism exists. Anti-Semitism, sadly, is not going anywhere, not in our lifetime. And we have to be able to understand that unlike other forms of racism, listen, over the summer, like I say, we had the anti-Indigenous, race, everything that was happening with the Indigenous communities here in Canada. Absolutely, I stood up for it. Absolutely, we all should have stood up for it. Mm-hmm. The anti-Asian hate. Absolutely, I stood up for it. Absolutely. The anti-black hate. Absolutely, I stood up for it. Absolutely, everybody should. And then when it came down to...
I love what you're about to say.
Yes. And then when it came down to the anti-Jewish, this is what hurt me, over the summer. So many people in my life, people that I work with, people that are friends with me, I stood up for their different communities because I saw what they were going through. And I understand as a Jew who, faces not the same type of racism, but a different type of our own. Of course I stood up for these people who are, how could I not? I would be a hypocrite if I didn't. But when it came to the movement, which was a blue dot, I think people were doing on their social media as kind of an homage or tipping their hat to kind of the anti-Semitism movement. I was the only one. I was the only one, and I couldn't let it go. I mean, I had to actually work it out. I had to speak to so many people in my field, whether it was personally, whether it was, I had to speak to people because I needed people to explain to me, how is it that you and I, who are friends, are not standing up for me the same way I stood up for you? And you know what I was told by so many people? We don't know what the right answer is because it's political. And
that's the thing. And that's exactly the point.
Yeah.
When it comes to Israel or Jewish people, it's always political.
Yeah.
If I were to go in I think what was it, 2009, I wanted to go film a movie called Fixated.
Yeah.
The world's fixation with the state of Israel.
Yeah.
Right? And people said, oh, you're going to make a propaganda movie? I'm like, I'm about to find out information.
Yeah.
Why are people fixated with this guy? So right away we throw in this political discussion where it's like, there's nothing political about this. Again, we're not saying anti-Palestinian anything. We're saying support our side, stop shooting rockets, stop killing innocent people, stop bothering us, we'll stop bothering you.
Right.
Like there's nothing there that you shouldn't defend.
But you know what you have to understand, and this is what I understood. I've understood this already for a couple of years, but I understand this, and I hope the viewers understand this as well, is that anti-Semitism in its traditional form is something that it's very hard that you'll find somebody who will be over and say, yeah, I support anti-Semitism, I hate Jews. You'll find it, but it's very hard to find it. It's much easier to swallow the pill of anti-Semitism if you mask it as anti-Zionism, which is a political thing.
Right.
Oh, anti-Zionism.
But those
okay.
same people have no idea what Zionism is. So
Of course. But here's the thing, is that because they put a different bow on it, it's easier for a lot of people who don't know what they're talking about to swallow. So, listen, people are very willing. I've learned this and I've seen this, and it's so frustrating to me. People are so willing to accept any kind of excuse why something is not anti-Semitism just to make themselves feel better about it. It's not. Oh, yeah, it's not anti-Semitism because. Well, hold on for a second. No, but that guy said it's not anti-Semitism. It has nothing to do with what it actually is anti-Semitism or isn't anti-Semitism. It's the way in which the world has now tried to... We are too close to the Holocaust. Again, bringing it up, but I have to. We are too close to the Holocaust for people not to be, at least overt or in public, disgusted with anti-Semitism.
Right.
However, the anti-Semites are still there and the anti-Semitism still exists. So what has the world done? They've packaged it differently. Let me package it this way so that, yes, it's anti-Semitism, but we're calling it something else and it's easier to swallow because it's not anti-Jew, it's anti-Israel. But what is Israel? Israel is a Jewish state. So what are you talking about? You know, there is so much dancing around it and people are so willing to accept it because it just makes them feel better about the fact that, you know, if someone says it's not anti-Semitic, it's anti-Zionist, or it's anti-Israel, it just makes it easier for them to swallow and they don't feel so badly about themselves. And this is something that if you talk to these, you will notice it's very much about what they feel. They don't care about what Jews feel.
What about the politicians, though? I mean, what responsibilities they work for us, right? The politicians, our tax money,
Yep.
right? But at the same time, like, and this is something that really bothers me, and it's going to sound a little bit off, but when we're experiencing like all the, you know, these anti-Semitic, you know, events that were happening around the city, on the same breath they were talking about Islamophobia, and it's like, why are we bringing in, like, right now we're here to talk about this. Why are we moving? Well, I remember when people were talking about Black Lives Matter and all lives matter, it was like, oh, don't equate the two. You know, we cannot do that. We need to separate. But yet when it came to this, it's like, well, we got to throw in the Islamophobia. But then you go, wait a second, but it's those people in Mississauga who happen to be, most of them Muslim, who are screaming for the death of Jews. Right. You know, so we're just talking about them. We're not saying anything about Islam. Yeah. We're talking about them particularly, but we're putting like the anti-Semitism and Islamophobia in the same category, always trying to equate the two. And in my opinion, you got to deal with one issue at a time.
Because you are 100% right. And the idea of and I say this all the time, it's always, again, the same people who were calling out, and as they should have, during the Black Lives Matter movement, kind of at the height of it, when people were saying, but what about, you know, these people? And you cannot let's not equate the two. Let's talk about this, and if you want to talk about that, that's separate. But we are talking about the Black Lives Matter movement now. We are talking about black men being shot down in the street. Let's talk about that. Let's concentrate on that. And you're exactly right. With the Jewish movement, the same way that I didn't see the support in the summer, anytime there was even an inkling of support, it was always with but also Islamophobia. We don't need to hear that because at the end of the day, I didn't see any Arabs or Muslims being beaten in the streets of New York and Los Angeles and Las Vegas, sitting eating sushi, where people were running up to the different places saying, who's a Jew here, and beating them. Or, you know, in that case would have been who's Muslim or who's Arab.
Right.
You never saw it. Why are you trying to bring up other people when clearly what we're talking about is this? And it goes back to the fact that anti-Semitism is acceptable at whatever level you want to say it. It's acceptable to so many or to too many people at some, whether it is minutely or completely. It's just accepted.
But we have these movements, and there's so many organizations. I don't even want to list them. But like, again, we can't do anything if the government, like the people in charge, are not making those changes. How come our government is really not doing anything about it? Yes, there has been some money that was allocated, but you know, when you're looking at the amount of money, there was barely anything. And what are they really doing with it? And where is the money really going, like to begin with? But what are we really doing, or what statements are we putting out there to try and save our community from having, you know, in my opinion, there's going to be bigger pogroms in this city than what we experienced. This was just the beginning. Why? We can look at France. We can look at England. We can look at other countries, you know, across, and we know that if the tsunami happens in the middle of the ocean, guess what? It's coming to our shores. So what is it that we're doing as a community, aside from just the grassroots, to try and get the politicians or the people in charge to make those changes for us?
You know, I hate saying something that makes people feel as though, God, there's no hope. But I will say this. I'm always very hopeful. I'm always hopeful that something better is going to happen. 2 years ago, again, before the pandemic started, Senator Linda Frum, who many people know, senator in Canada, who I happened to meet and we kind of became friends, had invited me to Ottawa to meet with different politicians across the political spectrum and kind of talk about, and it was through CIJA, for those who don't know, CIJA, is a Jewish movement, a Jewish-Israeli alliance here in Canada. And I went up with them and, you know, I got to meet all the heads of the different parties. I got to meet people within the party, speak with them, kind of talk about, you know, what it is that I feel people need to do. I cannot tell you, and in true politician form, you know, especially when it came to the New Democratic Party, was we support Israel, but Now, I'm not an English professor or I'm not an English teacher, but I do know that when you say a sentence that says no 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 no, but basically what you're saying is disregard what I said at the beginning. Now let me tell you what's really going to happen.
Right.
And that is basically what I was hearing from across the political spectrum. Really, in one way or another, is that yes, they know anti-Semitism exists. Yes, they're going to throw some money at it. Yes, throwing money at it doesn't really work.
Right.
To be honest,
Right.
I don't think, in my opinion, it works. I think that it needs to be a lot more when it comes down to, and you're a teacher, it comes down to education. Now, you teach at a Jewish school, so it's like preaching to the choir. But I think that
Believe it or not, they're more afraid of it sometimes.
Are they?
Oh yeah, because again, we play this.
Okay.
Well, we already know, so we don't need to.
Right.
People have different perspectives, so you'd be surprised.
All right. So you see,
Yeah.
So maybe, but I do think that I think education, Jewish history education. We saw this last summer in California. California tried to pass a bill that was an ethnic studies bill, and because I do work with so many movements in the U.S., they sent it to me to kind of look over it and speak specifically as kind of look at it through Sephardi Jewish eyes and kind of see, is there enough there in terms to make me comfortable with what it is that they're teaching. And I right away said, absolutely not. I mean, basically what they were trying to do was make Jews, Sephardi Jews are indigenous to Spain, Ashkenazi Jews are indigenous to, and I said, this is a lie.
Yeah.
This is a lie.
1492. People don't know
Right. No,
anything about it.
I said, where did Jews do you think Jews fell from the sky?
Yeah.
They talk about the diaspora. From the diaspora
Yeah,
from where?
exactly.
So they didn't fall
Well,
from
we
the
can't
sky.
say Judean mountains anymore. We can't call the West Bank Judea and Samaria because we have to
But I do.
abide by the new rule.
Bull, because I will say, not to you,
Yeah.
but I will say this is that I say it's very easy, and when people say to me, "Oh, West Bank," I said it's very interesting that you choose to use the term of a colonizer,
Yeah.
Jordan, who illegally colonized that part of the land. It wasn't called the West Bank in 48.
Right.
Up until 48, it was called Judea and Samaria,
Yeah.
and even today it's called Judea and Samaria. Only kind of.
Yeah.
But the world calls it. Who cares what the world calls
Yeah.
it?
Yeah.
Who cares? The world
Yeah.
stood by while Nazi Germany killed 6 million Jews.
Right.
Who cares what the world
Right,
thinks?
right.
But at the end of the day, I think that it's just going to be. It really comes down to education, and I don't, as much as I want to believe that before I die we're not going to see it. I think that this is such an intergenerational thing, and I think that it's going to start with us. I think that we need to do a much better job, especially in the U.S., with this idea of you cannot be Jewish and be American, or you cannot be Jewish and Canadian. Your Americanism comes first; everything else comes second. This is where I like Canada. Because Canada says, I'm Canadian, but you don't have to be Canadian. You're anything you want to be,
Yeah.
and you're also Canadian.
Right.
The U.S. has this melting pot idea of everybody needs to be this first, and then everything. And it's not dissimilar, and I don't mean to offend people when I say this, but that's a nationalist identity, nationalist ideal. Nationalism was what started Nazism. Nazism believed Germans, Aryans first, everything else second. This idea of American first, everything, it's such a bizarre thing. And I think that the Jewish community in the U.S., which is the second largest Jewish population, and I keep referring to the U.S. because it is the second largest Jewish community in the world, I think that we have to do a 180 with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the education system there needs to change, because without that change, we're not going to see a demise of anti-Semitism when people within our own community are really uplifting it.
I have a sort of a last topic to just bring
Sure.
up. If you had a dream, and if you had a dream that you can make a big difference when it comes to anti-Semitism, what would you do to impact? I mean, you started with education,
Yeah.
you said to teach, but what would be like the big idea? Because I feel like we're talking a lot about minor changes, talking to this person, putting a rally together, but we're talking about a serious change. What is it we can do to really impact the world and to teach people that we're no longer going to stand for anti-Semitic rhetoric?
I think the anti-Semitic rhetoric that we're facing today, I think we need to be cognizant of the fact that we are not talking about traditional anti-Semitism for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
We are talking about this new anti-Semitism, which is anti-Israel rhetoric or
Mm-hmm.
anti-Jewish state rhetoric. And I think that the best the best successes that I've seen in organizations or groups that have really been the connecting or the bridging between non-Jewish groups and the idea of what Israel really is. Now, I have had the opportunity in the past, decade to take different media groups back to Israel with me, because when I started this about 8 years ago when I did the very first one, it was important for me. I brought my show back actually in 2013. I brought Cityline with me back to Israel, and for me, it was so important to show the country not through the political lens. I was so sick of hearing here in CNN, in Canada, especially outside of Israel, you only hear about the politics,
Right.
the politics.
It sells, right? That's the reality.
But we're so much more.
Of course.
I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, like we're talking about the politics, but we don't talk about the food, the culture, the history, the strides that Palestinians and Israelis have made in kind of, doing. There are amazing groups
Right.
that work together and promote peace. Why are we not talking about those things? Why are we only talking about the negative? So it was very important for me to bring back a camera and show Israel through my eyes that was non-political. It was just about food, fashion, all the kind of the stuff that you would hope to see from any other country in the world. But Israel's always a political lens. And I say that because I think that is really the key to so much of this success. I see a lot of non-Jewish groups now bringing students, bringing different groups back to Israel to kind of see it with their own eyes.
Right.
Because it's very easy to listen to what other people are saying from both sides and, say, okay, I'm going to make up my decision based on what they... Nothing does as good a job as seeing it for yourself.
Right, absolutely.
And although I realize that, not the entire world is going to be able to get back and kind of see it for themselves, I think that is going to be the first part of it. I spoke with Hillel, which is another great organization here in Canada.
Well, Hillel is all over North America, all over the
North
world,
America,
really.
sorry.
It's
Yes. So it's basically student groups who kind of give Jewish student life on campuses. And one of the programs that they have, which I'm going to do something with them, is non-Jewish students. They bring them to Israel to kind of experience and to see Israel through their own eyes. And I say that that's successful because in the media groups that I brought back, my key is to always bring back non-Jewish people.
Right.
Because to bring back Jewish people, sometimes I feel like we know more or less whether or not you agree with it. We know more or less, but it is these other groups who have been taught their entire lives that Jews are doing something, that Israel is doing something, that the narrative that they've been taught and kind of indoctrinated with is not true. And for me, there has never been a greater success, like I say, than having these people stand there and come to me at the end of the thing. And I am very, very, very careful about not dictating, not trying to give my own, my own kind of ideas about what I just want them to see.
Right.
See, ask me a question. Don't ask me a question. I want you to just live it. And when they finish these tours, they come back and they say to me, I never knew.
Right.
I never knew.
Right.
I believed it to be this. I believed it to be this. So, I think I know that it's such a cliche to say kind of this education idea, but I really and truly believe the same way that we're seeing the rise in anti-Semitism happen on university campuses for the most part, because that's a breeding ground
Right.
of this kind of like academia and, that because it's happening there, that's where we need to fight it. That's where we need to fight it. And yes, like you say, university might be a little bit late, but if we can change the mentality in university before they get out into the real world, I think that we've done.
Well,
something.
I was a Hillel member while I was in university, and I remember Irshad Manji, who came. She came to talk about diversity, and she had the show also, I believe, on CDTV. And,
Okay.
Right, I think what it was, something queer. It was something about queer, but I forget the name.
Okay.
Anyways, so she came back and she gave it from she's a Muslim, lesbian, kind of telling you what Israel is. Israel is not what you're seeing, but it passed. And the reason I think it passed is because she's no longer like a big celebrity. And I think that we need to get the big names out there, the ones who have some impact, to go out and speak in behalf of Israel, because we're seeing what's actually happening. We're allowing, you mentioned before about what's happening in the U.S. With, I call them the four witches, of Congress, right? And where it's like to a point where they're talking about not paying money to have a defense system for Israel. Like, so now you're like, I get one thing about Palestinians, but now you don't even want to defend Israeli citizens and 1.9 Muslims or Arabs that live within the state. So do you feel like there is some sort of celebrities or someone out there that could really make that change, or it's never really going to change? It's just going to be momentary.
I think we are too much in this right now, the way that it is right now, too much in kind of this mentality of it's so en vogue to hate Israel that I think that it doesn't matter what celebrity comes out and speaks out against it, they're only going to get backlash for it. And I think that this is where people who have a platform have to be smart about the way in which they speak. As much as I would love every celebrity to stand up and say, everything that they think about, why Israel is important and why Israel is not what, people claim it to be. I see the way in which this backlash happens or this cancel culture happens. And I think that as long as cancel culture exists, you're going to see people who have these public platforms say, I'm not going to do it because it's going to affect me personally. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to lose my... And as much as I want to shake them and say, yeah, but that's not what's important in life, I can't say that to them because I understand that people's livelihoods mean something to them, and I understand that. I had that fear last summer.
But they can make that change, and if more people jump in on that...
But can they?
Of course, because you're not focusing on the Palestinian situation. All you're doing is you're defending the state of Israel, defending anti-Semitism. There's why if I'm talking about India, I need to be anti-Pakistan.
You know what? Do you remember what is his name? Who played Mark? What's that actor's name? Mark Ruffalo.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I remember. But he took something back, right? Like
no. So okay. So he was extremely anti-Israel.
Yeah.
Israel's awful. Israel's apartheid. Israel's all these things.
Yeah.
And then last summer, after everything started to happen in the U.S. with the attacks, the physical attacks on people, he came out and said, "Listen, I have said things that are incorrect. Israel is not this. Israel is not this. I think that we need to." And the same people who that morning were love Mark Ruffalo, like yummy, 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 yum, turned on him like in a 180 because he dared to give a more balanced view, just a more balanced view. Right then and there, I understood that there is no hope for this generation when it comes to that.
But that's because there's one or two people. I think if they gathered, like if they use their power for good, there could be a serious change.
Maybe. But then on the flip side, you know what people say to me all the time is they say, and I know this, social media has globalized everything, right? So we're not just by country.
Right.
At the end of the day, we need to understand that Jews are a teeny tiny minority of the world, certainly of Canada. And
a quarter of 1% of the world's population.
Nothing. Those who look to demonize us are a lot more. And while social media, like I say, and we started with this, is a great thing, it also has globalized this idea of anybody can have a platform. Anybody can say whatever they want. You don't have to be somebody who's well known. You can just make one comment and something go viral, and all of a sudden you became the celebrity. So I think we have to figure out a way that either, I used to say I think there should be an IQ test before people get a social media account. Like, do some sort of test just so you can't put out stuff there because it is just too easy to become so well known and to have something go viral that is completely false that affects some people negatively.
Right. And nobody takes responsibility for it.
And nobody has to.
Right. Exactly.
Nobody has to. Even the platforms don't take responsibility for it.
Right.
I mean, we're just watching right now with Facebook, everything that's happening. Twitter has got to be one of the biggest cesspools of racism and anti-Semitism. I don't even know how. I mean, it just shocks me. And verified accounts continue to spew both traditional and new anti-Semitism to no avail. Nothing happens to them. No backlash. They don't get their accounts taken away. Nothing. And as much as I don't want to get into politics, U.S. politics, as much as I despise the previous president, they took away his account, but won't take away the accounts of people who are overtly calling for genocide of Jews.
Right.
And it shocks me that we are just, and that's why I say anti-Semitism is the last form of racism that is globally accepted. And we are not going to be able to move forward for it until that changes.
So I don't like to finish off on a negative note,
so let's
right?
do something positive.
So let's bring something positive. So what is it that you think that we can do right now? Because we're in Toronto, how can people get involved with the grassroots movement?
Right.
How can one find you guys? If they have an idea, they want to either make a movie, write for the paper, to at least, because the more voices you hear, the more it's going to become evident that anti-Semitism is here, and we need to do something about it. So, but I think the average person doesn't know where they can go. They kind of sit there at home. They're what do you call them? Keyboard warriors. Sitting there just typing back. Against trolls that are right. That's all they're doing. That's their entire job. But what can one do in order to make a positive change?
Get involved. I mean, sitting at home behind your keyboard is no longer an option. Sadly, guys, it's no longer an option. And I understand during the pandemic, that was the easy thing to do. And sometimes that was the only thing to do.
Right.
But now that we're coming out of it, definitely go to United Grassroots Movement. Join them on Instagram. Join them on Facebook. Follow them. See what you can get involved in doing. It doesn't have to be something going out to create, some big event. It could be just something as small as a webinar. Something perhaps you're in a school. You work with student groups. You are in some sort of a synagogue. Whatever it is, to be able to at least start the conversation again and keep the conversation going. That's where I think we have sometimes a problem is we'll start a conversation and it just kind of falls to the wayside a little bit just because we keep speaking about it. And I understand that I say this all the time. Jews are tired. Jews are tired. We're tired of always fighting. We're tired of it. And it's draining. But I feel like the more we unite to do it, the easier it'll be. So when you have, organizations like United Grassroots Movement, you have the support of an organization behind you that can, of course, help you, to create these different programs that you might want to create. You work in a school. I would think that, to have maybe within schools, we see within universities, certainly, but I think also perhaps within, junior high schools, at least, I don't know elementary, but junior high schools and certainly high schools, I think that we should have, a little bit more, openness to have movements that might have a political leaning, but doesn't have to be a political, but at least speak out against it. Get students started younger. The younger you start, the more willing you will be to fight it as you get older. And also, I see it in university students. I see it in Jewish students who leave high school and they call me and they say to me, listen, I don't know what to do. I don't wear my kippah on campus anymore. I'm afraid to put my Magen David.
Right.
And it breaks my heart because I'm thinking, my goodness, what have we reached that people are afraid to wear their Magen? But I think that if we give the power to the younger generation and start them off now, I think that's going to give them the tools to really work, go into the world, go to university, and of course into the world, teaching and educating and really creating those allyships that we need.
Shai, this was wonderful. Even though I've been in this realm for a very long time, you educated me today. So I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
There are different approaches to things. It will be different from mine. And listening to you and, I know a little bit about your background. I applaud you for speaking up because you have something to lose.
Thank you.
I think I have less to lose. I'm not really in the public eye, but you being out there and being a target, I really want to thank you. And I think maybe there are people out there who would reach out to you for help, or maybe other celebrities out there who feel like they can make the change themselves.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much for being here. And thank you to you, the audience. I hope you
guys.
learned something. Next week on the show, we actually have Melissa Lansman
Nice.
coming on, right?
Oh,
So
I love
the
her.
conservative representative for Thornhill,
Yeah.
who, by the way, with her, I got the job at STEM with us due to her. So we have
Okay.
a long history.
Yeah.
And hopefully she's going to shed some light on what the politicians are doing in terms of helping the Jewish community.
She is my hair inspiration. I always say I want a haircut just like hers. I love her.
I
love her.
wanted to say the same, but unfortunately I have no
love
hair to
her.
play
Love
with.
her.
So again, thank you so much, Shai. Thank you to you, the audience. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Maria. Thank you to you two out there. I'm not going to mention the name. Really appreciate it, and have yourself an amazing night. And let's fight the fight, and by not fighting, but by educating. Have yourself an amazing night. Good night.
Thank you so much. That was great.